couple of items I've been asked to, of housekeeping, if you like, before we start the meeting proper. This meeting is being recorded and will be shown on YouTube later on today. So it's not going out in live real time, but it will be shown within a few hours of actually recording it. Please remember to use your microphones to speak, because occasionally people forget and it doesn't always come across clearly on the recording. And if you're using a laptop or a mobile phone on your desk, try to be aware that microphones and cameras on these things can pick things up that's on your desk. So make sure that you don't accidentally show something that you don't want to show on the camera. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping there. Apologies for absence is our first item. And Andrea, we have?
Apologies from Councillor Wallace.
Just Councillor Wallace, so we're still quorate. That's good, excellent. The minutes of the last meeting, item number 2. As usual, I don't intend to do a page turner on the minutes, but just to take any questions and if anybody has identified any problems with the minutes. No. They look pretty good to me, so we'll take them as read. Okay, thank you. So the minutes are agreed from the last meeting. A disclosure of members' interests, as usual. I don't expect to read this entire thing. It's in your information pack there. But if anybody has any interests that they need to declare at this point, Councillor Sesswood, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, Chair, it's just the same as I did in the last one, actually, is about the fact that I'm a retired member of the time that I'm at Port 5 again to get my pension paid off the West Yorkshire Pension Fund, so I shall not be taking part in item 8.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. I don't think you need to probably absent yourself from that part, but you just not take part in the actual discussion itself. Okay. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yep.
Actually, Chair, I think probably it is best if an interest is declared. I think the rules do say that should leave the room. So sorry for being a stickler.
Okay, I've been corrected here. You have to wait outside, but don't go too far. Okay, so we'll call you back in, Councillor Sesswood. Okay, thank you for that. So no more for declarations of interest? No? Okay, so the first report we have on our paper pack today is item number 4, which is it's the monitoring report and action log, which is a regular standing item that we have. So let's quickly go through that. Some of these items have been closed off since the last meeting. Let's have a look. Well, the first one is the external audit report. Councillor Oliver queried whether the re-evaluation reserve error in the NCC group accounts would impact on the corporation tax. It was agreed that the Sec 15 officer would respond, and the outcome at the last meeting, I think, was that we're waiting for the 2021 accounts to be finalised before a full response can be given. Is that still the same position?
No. Apologies, Chair. The 2021 accounts audit hasn't yet been finalised, but I thought that this issue had actually been answered at the time anyway, and I thought Cameron had actually provided a bit of explanation on this point, that it's a reclassification issue and wouldn't have any impact on corporation tax. But I will still provide a formal response once the accounts have been formalised. But that's my understanding of the position.
Okay, thank you for that, Jan. I think we can say that that's had an informal response, but not formally closed off as yet. So we'll keep that as kind of semi-open, but not quite fully closed off, if that's all right. Yeah, but thank you for that. The second one, I think, definitely has been closed off, which was the Section 114 report by the Section 151 officer. The terms of reference, which we were involved in, and we agreed at the last meeting, which have now, I think, been issued. Have they?
Yes, they have, Chair. And by way of an update, I can inform the committee that John Gilbert, who is the ex-chief executive of Swindon Council, has been engaged to undertake that external investigation, and he has already started work. And we hope that those key interviews will be happening over the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Excellent. Good. Well, that answers a question that's been obviously quite at the forefront of our minds for quite a while now, so that's good. So we'll keep those two as open, but we'll close them off further down the line when they actually come to you, Councillor.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And it's good to hear that you've got some progress, because we've heard there's been some difficulty in finding someone with the experience and knowledge to undertake that. But we hopefully we'll get a report back at our next meeting on that one, as long as it's done in time. So that's good. There's possibly another couple of things that I would have expected to see on the action list. That was certainly one. But there were discussions at the last audit committee about looking into the processes and practices about employment and redundancy payments. And I did think that there was a report that we asked as a committee for a report on that to come back to this committee. And if that was the case, I would expect it to be on the action list as something to actually happen for us. And then the second thing is probably slightly more general and related to the first two, really, but we did discuss as a committee the Keller report and all of the issues contained in that. The Keller report itself was quite general, but did point to a number of governance processes that this committee would quite properly look into to make sure that the council was doing things correctly in the future. And so I would expect actually that to be on an action list, a review of what's happening as a result of the council's response to the Keller report.
Yeah, I think the second of your points is definitely a point for myself as the chair. I think I agree with you, and I think, Andrea, if we can capture that on the action list, because I think it is an ongoing issue for this committee to keep alive to what's happening in that area. Irrespective of what is or is not happening, we need as a committee to keep alive to it, so we need to capture that one, I think. But I think, Jan, you maybe could comment on the first one that Councillor Jackson mentioned.
Yes, Chair. So you're quite right, Councillor Jackson, that was something, an action that was agreed. I have just in the last couple of days received the draft of the internal audit report, so I'm currently reviewing that. I may need to take some further advice depending on the contents of that report, and then my intention would be that we would report back to the next meeting of the committee on the outcome of all of that work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. That's excellent, Jan. We'll capture those two items, Andrea, as two extra actions, and cover them at the next audit committee. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Dale, you have a question?
Can I just add on to what Councillor Jackson said, that I think maybe it would be helpful if we could actually put it in the work programme. So it's there in the work programme, so we could put it in every other month, every other meeting. But also, you're talking about other reports. I think we haven't had, there's a SITFA report which hasn't come back to this council, to this audit committee, so maybe we could have that in the work programme sometime.
But is that just another thing for this action part then, Councillor Dale?
I think it's just to be added to the work programme and the action plan, whatever. Yeah,
to the action part. It's a report which we expect to come to this committee but hasn't actually arrived yet, so maybe we can add that one in as well. And that is the whole point when we instituted this, is to make sure these little loose ends don't drop between the cracks and we forget to follow them up, if you like.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair, on that specific point, I think I advised the committee I had that report some time ago, but we were considering what to do with it. It's actually been subsumed into the strategic change work programme as part of the fit for purpose organisation work stream, and the strategic business case, which will prioritise all of the different actions, is due to be completed at the end of October. So that might work in terms of an update specifically on how we're going to take that forward at the next meeting. I'm not entirely sure. But in the meantime, the report can certainly be circulated to members of this committee if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, I think that's that will be fine. But we'll still capture it here, and we'll cover that off next time when the report has been circulated. I think that's the way to go. Okay, thank you. So, any more questions on this part of the action part? The other part, the work programme action part, is simply just a list of the standing items that we're expecting. And I think we have annual Treasury Management year-end report, which is coming today. The Northumberland County Council consideration of going concern status accounts for the year ended 31st of March, which is today as well. Annual government statement, yes, that is coming. And the FPS Local Pension Board report is today. External audit progress report and the Group Audit Committee update report are all on today's agenda, so they've all been ticked off, so that's going according to plan. So thank you for that. So unless there's any more questions about the action part, we shall move on to agenda item number 5, which is the Northumberland County Council consideration of going concern status for the statement of accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2022. And this one is from the Section 151 officer, so thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Chair. So, as the report explains, there is a presumption that local authority accounts will be prepared on a going concern basis. Nevertheless, we do this annual exercise because it's a useful and valuable discipline. So the report sets out all of the considerations that we've taken into account in arriving at a judgment, or I have arrived at a judgment that the accounts should be prepared on a going concern basis. There are clearly some quite strong financial headwinds which are starting to develop. Not sure starting to develop, actually. I think the question is exactly how much worse things are going to get. And as members of the committee will know, we recently reported on the forecast outturn for this financial year, that in gross terms we're looking at an overspend of about 17 million, and net of the exceptional inflation reserve, which we'd set aside at the beginning of the year, just under 12 million. I think it is clearly helpful that an intervention is being made to address rising energy costs. That will help us as a council, as well as helping residents and businesses. But the latest problem, of course, is going to be now about rising interest rates as the Bank of England tighten monetary policy to bear down on inflation. The latest estimates of where interest rates are going to end up, is around 6%, which is significantly higher than we had anticipated, certainly when we set this year's budget, and even I think our planning assumptions at this point for next year. So that's, there's a bit of swings and roundabouts there. But nevertheless, the council is in a strong position financially. We go into that challenging period with significant reserves, strong financial disciplines, and we are probably as well placed as any to weather that storm. But we are going to have to, I think, batten down the hatches in a number of areas, because it's undoubtedly going to be very, very difficult over the next 18 months. But having said all of that, clearly the risk side of the equation is increasing, which means that it's more important than ever that we maintain an adequate level of reserves to deal with the unforeseen. But I don't think anybody would argue that the council remains in robust financial health for the time being, at least, and we are a going concern.
Okay, thank you. We're aware that the pressures are mounting on a daily basis, so it's almost happening in real time in front of us, isn't it? I mean, you watch the news with trepidation these days. But the council, we understand, I mean, we fully appreciate the council has actually got a very good, robust set of accounts. It is actually probably in a better position than a lot of comparable councils in that respect, but that doesn't make anybody feel sanguine about the whole situation, because we don't know how bad things are likely to get. But obviously, this committee obviously needs to keep tabs on how things are going, and obviously we'll look to you to actually bring us updates regularly. Do you have any particular comments on this document, Councillor Oliver?
Thank you, Jan. Can I just ask, both of the candidates, the final two candidates in the leadership election, were both making sort of strong statements about local authorities doing a lot of heavy lifting in delivering public services. Are you getting any indication from DLUP or anybody else about what might happen in terms of local authority funding at the back end of this year? And is it going to be another one-year funding settlement as it has been for the last few years?
Unfortunately, no. We're not getting any indications at all, other than there was a £500 million funding package for social care around hospital discharge that was announced this week. Again, we don't have the detail of that, and I suspect that money is going to go to the NHS rather than to local authorities. But undoubtedly, the government are going to have to do something. Because you are going to see a whole slew of Section 114 notices being issued, not by this council, but by other councils who aren't in as fortunate a position as we are. What that will look like and when it's likely to be announced, I have absolutely no idea. Ordinarily, we'd have the Chancellor's autumn statement around second or third week in October. I understand that the Chancellor will now be making an announcement of some sort on the 23rd of November. So that's, 5 to 6 weeks later than we would normally have it. And although no one has told us that we're not going to have the finance settlement in December as we would normally expect, it's quite possible that will be pushed back. But December, as you know, is very late in the day for us to be getting our financial settlement. Normally, we have pretty good intelligence ahead of that, of what's likely to be in the finance settlement. This year, we're not being given any indication at all, which is very worrying. And as for your question about, is it like to be another one-year settlement? Yes, is the short answer. Any funding reforms, undoubtedly are going to be pushed back the other side of the next general election. I can't see it happening anytime soon.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Councillor Jackson, that's all you have.
Thank you. Thanks for that, and thanks for the report. It is quite good for us to have a sense check about this council as a going concern, and it is quite comforting to know that we've got some of the largest reserves of any council in the whole country. But still, we have to plan ahead, and I see you're doing that through spending £3 million per year over the next 3 years on a strategic transformation programme, and that's fine if there are some real results coming out of that. But those of us who've been around for a while have seen these things come and go for a period of 20 years, and nothing's too much. Some seems to come out of most of them. But anyway, there is a sort of a final strategic business case promised by the end of September. So we're at the end of September now. I just wondered if we could actually have a look, and from a value for money sort of perspective, to see whether that £3 million a year is going to come out with some real product.
Okay, I'll pass on to John, and then I've got Councillor Towns has got a question which I presume is relating to the same topic.
Different question.
Okay, thank you. Again, John, thank you.
Actually, it's going to be the end of October. So what we have had is first sight of the opportunity analysis, which says, these are all the areas where we think there are opportunities to make savings, and an initial quantification of those savings. The strategic business case then takes those opportunities, does some further validation, and then sets out the prioritisation, the phasing, and also the investment that's needed in order to deliver those savings over the next 3 financial years. So that's the strategic business case, which won't be ready until the end of October. I have had first sight, and the programme board have had first sight of the opportunity analysis, so we know the scale of the opportunity, or the potential scale of the opportunity, but until that further validation has been done and we've got the full business case, you know, it's not terribly useful, other than just an indication of what might be achievable. But one thing that I am clear about is that we will need to invest in order to deliver those savings, and that's what the 3 million is for. It's just been set aside as a finger in the air at the moment. Once we have the strategic business case, we will know exactly how much we need to invest and where we're going to invest in and what return we can expect. But this is about driving out efficiencies across the whole organisation, and it's work which has largely been done in most other authorities. I think because Northumberland has had a relatively benign financial environment for a number of years, that we haven't been pushed to do some of these things which other councils have already done. So, you know, I in my mind, there's no doubt that the savings are there to be had, and it's part of our ongoing, you know, pursuit of value for money, that we, you know, that we have to deliver them. But having the right governance and the right resourcing in place is absolutely essential, because you're right, we've all seen so-called transformation programs that have failed to deliver anything of value.
Yeah. But, that would be very, very interested to see the outcome once you've got to that stage.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Okay, well, as I think that we can all agree, we're interested in the outcome of that. That's another one to capture, I think, on our action log. So we'll get an update on that when it's in the due date, if Andrew wouldn't mind putting that on. Now I'll come to Councillor Towns next, and then Councillor Dale after that.
Thank you, Chair. It really is kind of a two-part question, or a part question, part point. We've seen in the local press, and there have been comments from councillors, that there's a £17 million black hole in the council's finances. Now, looking at page 3 of the report, page 21 of the pack, there is a forecasted overspend of 17.135 million, but then there seems to be a 5.2 million offset from exceptional inflation reserve. So my question really is where does that, how has that 5.2 million arisen? Has it been specifically put aside in previous budgets to deal with this kind of thing, or is it coming out of our what have been described as general, very healthy general reserves of 70 million? And of the 12 million overspend that's then forecast, how will we deal with that? Can it all be dealt with through finding efficiency savings, as outlined in the following pages? And rather than the question, I think the second point is if you were to go out on the streets and say, do you think, to residents of Northumberland, do you think Northumberland County Council is a financially sound and strong organisation? I'm afraid I think you'd get the answer, ha, 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 no. Most people would say not. And so I think if we're now being told, we know in this room, and we're being told again today, that actually the council's position is a strong and healthy position, especially relative to other local authorities in the region and around the country, then do we not need to have a look at our messaging? Because, you know, people are worried enough about their own circumstances, and they don't want to be worried that their council services are going to be slashed further, that the council tax will go up massively again. I think we need to be giving some reassurance to the public. So when things are reported that there's a £17 million black hole, I mean, this tells me on page 3 that's simply not true. When we have a recent article was about the voluntary redundancy programme. So every member of staff has been asked, if you would like to apply for voluntary redundancy, that will be considered. the way that that's being portrayed by the press and interpreted by the public is that we're looking to sack virtually everybody who works for the council, which clearly is ludicrous. So can we look at our messaging about this information? Because I know this is going out on YouTube later, but I seriously doubt you'll have 50,000 people watching it. There might be a few hundred at most. Yeah. We need to get the messaging out there, and we need to ensure that people are not panicked by this kind of information.
I think it is a very good point to be Councillor Towns, is that the perception and the reality might not be quite on the same page. I suppose there's a difficulty as a council we have to tell the accurate figures to the public. We must be absolutely upfront and clear about it. Sometimes they can look alarming in themselves. When you start bandying around figures like £12 million, £15 million, etc., those are big numbers and obviously upset a lot of people. Do we actually, as a council, I suppose, have a duty to actually try to sugar the pill by saying, but don't worry too much because X, Y, and Z? I'm not quite sure what the answer to that is and whether that's actually a question for the Audit Committee to be quite honest.
Sorry, Chair, it's less about sugaring the pill. It's more about making sure that what's being reported is actually accurate, because there's a big difference between 17 million and 12 million. And there's a big difference from the perception of the public of the financial health of this council and the reality which is presented in this report.
Yeah. I think that it's a question of presentation, isn't it? So I'm not quite sure if that's one for yourself, Jan, is the section 151.
I'm not sure I can stop local reporters writing sensationalist headlines, including phrases such as black hole councillor. I mean, a black hole to me suggests something which sucks in everything and results in mass destruction. We're talking about a net £12 million overspend in the context of a very significant budget, one of the largest budgets of any English council, and hundreds of millions of pounds worth of reserves. So I think there's an issue about proportionate reporting, but as I say, that's not something which is within my direct gift. What I will say is that our financial status is audited every year by Mazars, and as part of the value for money assessment, Mazars give their judgment, which is external validation. So you don't just have to take my word for it that we're in a financially strong position. Our external auditors are also saying that they don't have any concerns on that front. But to go back to your specific question about how that £5.2 million reserve came about, when we set this year's budget, we already knew that inflation was starting to take off, particularly around energy costs, and we built in some additional allowance. One of the things that has happened over the course of this year is that the cost of living crisis, the scale and the speed that it has come upon us, has exceeded all expectations. I think we've all been taken by surprise at just how fast and how far energy prices have taken off. And we have seen, a very large pay settlement as well this year, partly in response to the cost of living crisis. So yes, when we closed the 2021 accounts, and we were reporting a significant underspend last year, we decided to set aside 5.2 million in this exceptional inflation reserve, and that was approved by Cabinet when they received the Outturn report in June of this year. So that's where the 5.2 million came from. It was about having a bit of foresight and saying, we're going to need this. Let's tuck away some money now to help us deal with that in-year pressure. The difficulty that we have is that is not our ability to cover that from our reserves, and I have no doubt there will be a residual overspend that has to be funded from reserves. I don't think we can pull back £12 million in year, but the issue is that if we've got a 17 million overspend this year, what does that then mean in terms of the size of the potential budget gap for next year and beyond? And that's the real concern, and that's why I'm saying that you know, there is an expectation that government will step in and do something, because we are not the only council in this position. And yes, we could sustain, you know, draw down from reserves in order to balance the budget this year, as undoubtedly we will have to, and next year. But even for Northumberland, there comes a point at which we can no longer continue to do that. And that's, you know, that's why, you know, the consensus is that there will be something forthcoming from government to help councils through this period, but we just don't know how much and how that's going to be distributed and prioritised. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dale, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just go on what David was saying? And I quite agree with your headlines and misleading. They don't mislead. They're difficult to understand unless you actually understand the context of local government finance. And I think that's a problem all over. I just wanted to say, I think quite rightly, is the concerns we would have is about the black holes and the cutbacks. And I have to say the pay award came in quite late. And I think if it had come in a lot earlier, then maybe it would have been more, you know, pre-warned, but we weren't. But actually, when people say, are we going concern, and you're talking about cutbacks and financial issues, the first thing people think about is their roads, potholes, and everything else that goes with it. And therefore, one of the things one could say, there is a concern, for instance, which I raised the other day, you know, at full council about my concerns about delivery of social services. And I do welcome the fact that actually, although they've asked for voluntary redundancies, they haven't asked for voluntary redundancies in social services. So there is concern about delivery of services, and also the big one is, you know, we were talking earlier on about recruitment of people who can do certain type of work, forensic work, audit work, whatever. But the council is also having concerns about recruitment, and I do get that. So it's not just this council that's got concerns about recruitment, but it's broader, and actually it's causing concern, obviously, to the council, the fact we haven't got the people who can actually come and work and deliver those services. So there's a bigger picture, but I can understand quite what Councillor David Towns was saying. Sorry, David. But actually, the headlines can breed concern. But
Councillor,
you know,
I think that's thank you. Sorry, pardon me for being rude. I don't think there's so much a question here for the 151 officer, though, is there?
Well, it's just no. I can ask the 151 officer. Thank you. Do you think you put in place then enough? You've stopped this, that, and the other, and various things. Put in place enough to ensure that we are a growing concern for next year, taking into account all the things about recruitment, etc.
Yes, is the short answer, but I can't guarantee that it will be painless.
Thank you. I think
And
that's
I think
actually.
you know that is clearly something that I think we all need to understand. Is that you know. We are going to have to make some difficult choices. And when I said we are going to have to tighten our belts, the efficiency programme, that strategic change programme, will bear fruit, and that will be a major part of our response in terms of ensuring that we can continue to balance the budget without cutting frontline services. And that's why that strategic change programme is so important, and why we actually started that earlier in the year, because we knew that we would need to drive out some of those efficiencies in the longer term, because otherwise we'll be forced into cutting those very services that our residents most value, and we don't want to do that unless we absolutely have to.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, well, unless there's any other questions, Peter Jackson. Peter Topping, I should say.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick ones, if I may. And I don't want to stretch the Section 151 officers' scale of knowledge too much. I mean, I think this is helpful, but specifically, you mentioned utility costs and school transport fuel. There's a wrinkle which is to do with the rurality of much of Northumberland, that many of the village schools are oil, their heating is oil, and I know that there's an energy bill relief report from the Department for Education, but it's just, are the county schools going to be able to cope with the rise in costs of heating oil, which always seems to get left to one side when the government talks about support for, for gas and electricity. So Jan, I don't expect that you are on this one, but
I
it would be
don't think that's
helpful
one
if
that you
someone...
can answer.
No,
I would
but-
be surprised if you could.
I think there has been recognition that households that use oil for their heating need some financial support, and I suspect that when we see the full detail of the package of support for businesses, there will be some consideration of that. But, I'm merely making an assumption there. I don't actually have any first-hand knowledge that that's the case.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Peter, was that your that was it? Okay,
Yeah, no, that's fine.
that's great. Thank you. Okay, well, if there's any more, Councillor Grimshaw.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I've just also got concerns, Jan, with regard to, the benefits payments, the precepts, repayments of grants and so forth, and also with the ability for people now with rising costs of everything to actually pay. What kind of risks and impacts will that have on the council? And where would you be able to take the money out for to cushion that impact? And also, could you perhaps give me any indication if you feel confident with the current inflation rate and the borrowing, because obviously with interest rates, etc., going up, have you got any immediate concerns with the borrowing that the council has? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we are monitoring the collection fund performance carefully because I think I've said this previously, we are expecting the cost of living crisis to have an impact on collection rates, both for businesses and for business rates and council tax. And the monitoring suggests that there has been a dip. That it held up pretty well in the first quarter, but the second quarter we're starting to see collection rates fall. Not massively, but enough, to be of concern. So when we set the council tax for next year, we will have to take account of any surpluses or deficits on the collection fund. We do have some money set aside for collection fund smoothing, which we can use on a temporary basis. And that funding is there to make sure that we don't have big swings from one year to the next, with huge surpluses and then huge losses. And sometimes the way that the grants work through, it can cause sort of distortions in the collection fund performance. So we'll continue to keep a close eye on it. But it's the provision for doubtful and bad debts which is going to hit us, and that will have to be factored into the budget setting for next year. Sorry, I've forgotten what was your second question?
It was with regard to the borrowing and interest
Oh, borrowing.
rates.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so at the moment, because we've had very high cash reserves and we've wanted to maintain a strong liquidity position, we've been under borrowing, which means that instead of taking on external debt, we've been using our internal cash to cash flow capital expenditure, and we expect that to continue. That we will have an under-borrowing position for some time to come, but we are starting to take on some external debt now and lock into some fixed rate deals on a relatively short-term basis, sort of 1 to 2 year basis, in the expectation that PWLB rates are going to increase very significantly over the next 12 months. But again, we're fortunate, and that's the other consequence of if we draw down on our reserves to support revenue spending. That means that either we have to cut back our capital expenditure, or we have to undertake external borrowing, which then just adds a further pressure on the revenue budget, because all of these things are related. So yes, I mean, capital programme is something we're looking at. It may well be that we need to look at the phasing of some of the capital commitments that we have, and we certainly, you know, it's a huge exercise, but we're certainly reworking all of the debt charge forecasts at the moment, and you know, if interest rates go to 6%, that is way beyond anything that we were previously assuming. So there will be an impact there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Does that answer your question, Councillor? Okay, thank you. Well, there's a lot in this. Obviously, we're living in difficult times, and we will have to keep monitoring this. And I'm expecting this to come back to regular reports to the committee. And obviously, we will be following this through, Jan, as the year goes on. And I'm sure you'll be keen to give us an appraisal of how things are working out in practice. But for the time being, unless there's anything else, I think we are, as a committee, asked to approve that the council is considered to be a going concern and that the statement of accounts 21-22 is prepared on that basis. So can we have a proposer for that? Councillor Oliver, and second by Councillor Dale. And are we happy to approve on that basis? Yes. I'm seeing a show of hands. Yes, that's fine. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for that. Very useful discussion. So that was agenda item 5. Agenda item 6 is the one that actually was not supplied initially with your paper pack, but has been supplied subsequently. And if anybody needs paper copies, there are some still on the front desk there. This is the Treasury Management Annual Report for the financial year 21-22. And again, this is from Jan Willis, the Section 151 officer. So over to you, Jan.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've actually discussed quite a lot of the issues that touch on this report already. So this is a backward-looking report for the financial year 21-22, just reporting to the committee the Treasury management activities that we undertook and how they complied with the agreed strategy. So as I've previously said, in a very low interest rate environment, we agreed that our strategy would be to maintain an under-borrowing position, and we certainly did that. We complied with the approved strategy in all respects, except that at one point, because we had so much cash, I had to temporarily approve an increased limit for placement with money market funds from 25 million to 35 million per counterparty, and from 150 to 170 million overall for money market balances. Chair, I don't propose to repeat a lot of the discussion that we've already had, other than to say, you know, clearly we're looking at a very different set of circumstances, both in terms of the current financial year, which will be reflected in the half-yearly report that comes to this committee, I think, at your November meeting.
Absolutely. No, I quite agree, Jan. I think we have probably had a very, very in-depth discussion which has encompassed a lot of this already, but just open the floor if anybody has any specific questions. Yes, Councillor Oliver.
Jan, you mentioned that you were beginning to lock into some short-term loans. Where you were expecting the PWLB rates to go, and are you locking into short-term because you're expecting them then to start falling?
Well, PWLB rates usually follow gilts, and you know, gilts are heading to. I think they're at about 4.5% at the moment. You know, they're easily going to go to 5.5%, 6%, I would say. So that's the PWL rates that we expect to be on offer. You know, over the next 12 months. So it makes sense where we have opportunities to lock in now. And it's mainly authority to authority lending. So we've done 2 tranches of authority to authority lending. And that is on a short-term basis, but it gives us a bit of a breathing space while we try and work out sort of where the markets are going. Because even though interest rates might hit 6% next year, we don't know how long they're going to stay there. So I think along with everybody else, we're just trying to sort of like get our heads around sort of where the markets are likely to go, you know, every day we're finding that things have moved on faster and further than we previously thought they were going to. So it's very volatile.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Dale.
Can I just ask you very quickly? I know the PFI, one of the big PFIs, we're locked into at a very low level and for a long time, which is absolutely fine. Have we got any others that actually aren't locked in? Or any leasing or any agreements or any capital things that actually aren't locked in? Come back to me with that, because it could be a difficult one.
Yeah, it might be helpful if we have an offline discussion so I can just understand exactly what it is that you're looking for.
I know one or two
Okay.
particularly.
Right, rather than discuss that here, let's take that offline, and the Section 151 officers can maybe update the committee just via an email maybe later on. Okay, thank you. Any more questions on this one? Okay, well, obviously these sort of things in more calmer times, obviously these sort of reports come as a kind of a standing item, and then they get discussed and then we move on. But obviously things are happening, as we said earlier, in real time in this, so we will be probably revisiting these topics in future audit committees, and we'll probably be getting, I'm sure, updates from yourself, Jan, about how things are moving as things progress. But it looks like we're moving into, as you say, very, very difficult waters. So we'll keep an eye on that. But thank you for presenting that. I think we are asked as a committee to recommend the County Council review and note this report. So can I have a proposer to do that, please? So we propose a Councillor Robert, and again seconded by Councillor Dale. Thank you. So, okay, we move on. Item number 7. Excuse me 1 second. This is, again, one for our Section 151 officer. It's the Annual Governance Review and Annual Governance Statement 2021. So, again, over to yourself, John.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is presenting for the committee's approval the final draft of the annual governance statement. So there was an earlier draft which came to this committee, I think, before Christmas. And clearly there has been an awful lot of water under the bridge since then. So the annual governance statement has been updated to reflect all of the events in the period following on from the end of the 2021 financial year, so all the post-balance sheet events. So that does include matters such as the commissioning of the CALA review and the outcome of that corporate governance review, the issue of the Section 114 report, and so the committee are being asked to review that revised statement and to check that they are satisfied that all of the appropriate issues have been referenced now in that report, and then also to note the further improvement actions that are being taken to strengthen the Council's governance arrangements. So I wasn't proposing to take members through the governance statement itself, but
No,
I'm happy to do so if
don't.
you want me to, Chair.
No, I don't think that's necessary unless anybody particularly wants that. But I think obviously the key thing here is to look at the Appendix A of this report, which is the annual governance statement, which has been obviously amended and updated, as you say, Jan, to make sure that we're happy with the amendments, that nothing has slipped through the cracks there, and that we're happy with that particular appendix. So I'll open the floor for any questions if anybody has anything specific. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, no, thank you. I've been quite critical about annual government statements from this council for quite a while, a year or two now, 2 or 3 years, to be honest with you. I think the overall objectives are very laudable. We've got the 3 lines of defence outlined on page 55. I think what we haven't grasped as a council is is what we do when those 3 lines of defence don't work. What do we do when procedures aren't followed? What do we do when there are fundamental issues of governance within the council? And I'm actually still not comfortable that if the council doesn't recognise what's gone wrong, how do they make sure it doesn't happen again in the future? And I'm saying that from obvious experience. The other thing within the report, I've just lost the light. Oh, there we go. It's the role of this audit committee in things going forward. So it's you talk on page 67 about the Internal Audit Service playing a key role in the assessment of the Council's framework of governance, risk management and control, and making recommendations for improvement where necessary. I think those obviously recommendations for improvement should actually come through this committee, and that we should have a role in making sure that the processes and procedures within the council are being followed. And at the moment, I'm not really comfortable that this committee is fully included in those in that review of governance processes, why I'm sort of making this statement is just to ensure that that does happen. There are quite a number of recommendations that have fallen out of the Colour Review and all of the new governance sort of processes that flow out of that. And I'm just not comfortable that this audit committee is actually being fully included in the way that it should be in that. And I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not sure if that's so much a question as an opinion.
Well, the question would then be how will this audit committee be included in making sure that the procedures and processes of this council follow good governance, particularly in relation to the recommendations of the Colour report.
So in terms of this particular report and in terms of the text in here, you feel that it doesn't give audit committee sufficient kudos or credibility or recognition of its essential role? Because I didn't actually personally, I've got to say, read it that way when I read it on page 69. It seems fairly clear about the role of the audit committee and where we fit in and what our remit is. But I think you probably do make a point, is that the audit committee has got a very important role in the 3 lines of defence model, which the council is wedded to, the council is making active use of. So maybe if there's extra clarity required in there, I'm not quite sure. I'll leave it to you, John. What do you think? It's a difference of interpretation, maybe, in some respects.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just make an observation, perhaps, which is that perhaps the audit committee hasn't asserted its role as much as perhaps it ought to have in the past. I mean, we've agreed that the Colour progress reports will come here on a regular basis, and I think it's for this committee to determine what it wants to see. It does have a key role in ensuring that that lessons are being learned. That was one of the points that came out of the Colour review, that the council doesn't do that particularly well, and making sure that there is proper follow-up of agreed actions across the piece. I mean, in terms of the role of internal audit in the assurance process, I mean, that might be appropriate for Kevin to comment on that. But Kevin does bring a regular assurance report to this committee, which sets out the basis on which the internal audit opinion about the adequacy of the arrangements is based. I suspect, Councillor Jackson, that what sits behind your question is that you'd like to see some more detail of the internal audit reports themselves, which don't routinely come here. But maybe I've misunderstood.
Yeah, no, it was more in relation to the sort of the governance issues that are being discussed within the council after the Keller report. I don't think we've really had anything back. And I know you're probably still in the stage of formulating a lot of that, but I think we should see that as and probably once it's been formulated, it should actually come back here for a proper external review from the Audit Committee.
Was that always the plan, Jan? Because we were involved in the remit of the setting up of these things. It would presumably be to close the circle by bringing it back to Audit Committee. That would be my understanding.
Well, I think that certainly would be sensible. I mean, the Cala Action Plan does form part of the annual governance statement, and this committee has a role in, in overseeing sort of governance processes generally, and making sure that there is proper follow-up in terms of agreed actions from previous annual governance statements. So I would think that's part and parcel of that process. And the issue for me is, sort of how frequently do you want to receive those updates? And similarly, in relation to the follow-up, from my Section 114 report, so they're all matters which are referenced in the annual governance statement. The agreed actions are set out here. It's for the committee to determine how much involvement it wants to have in monitoring the implementation.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting comment, because the building blocks are here, the actual pieces are here. It's depending on how this committee, and that's us basically, want to see whether we want the very granular kind of information coming through on every single occasion, which we could do, or whether we're prepared to let things run a little bit quietly in the background and then just get summary reports a bit more infrequently. And I think that's the difference of, maybe a difference of opinion. Different people have a different view on that. Some people would prefer to see things very much more in real time, and some people would prefer the more kind of classic approach of getting things on a more sort of cyclical basis. And that's probably something that this committee ourselves have to work out a little bit more as to how far we want to go in that direction. Because I'm taking, from what you've said, there is no problem at all in providing that information on a more granular basis and a more regular basis if that's what the committee requires. So I don't see any problem with that. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's for the committee themselves to decide. Councillor Dale, you had your hand up quite a while ago.
I just want to connect with what Councillor Jackson said. And I think the concern I have is there's not enough detail too, but on, say, page 69, it says the Audit Committee's responsibility with regard to the governance, risk and control are to review the Council's corporate and governance arrangements against a good governance framework. And obviously, somewhere along the line on page 49, it says during the latter part of 2020 and early 21, it became apparent that there were significant weaknesses in the Council's corporate governance arrangements. Now, that was significant weaknesses. So what I would suggest was, I don't know what they were, and how they were recorded, and then obviously it appears in the Cala review, I presume, but there doesn't seem to be any. To me, I don't know who actually noted that the weaknesses, whether it was the Audit Committee or where it was pulled out, and I think that's maybe what Councillor Jackson is saying about having more information on actually the governance and where it went wrong.
Okay, is that a question?
So,
does that make sense?
Yes, I think it does, Councillor Dale. So, this committee had raised serious concerns about our governance arrangements. The leader of the council had raised concerns about our governance arrangements. The statutory officers, or at least two of the statutory officers, had raised significant concerns, and the external auditor had also raised external concerns. All have a role, all of those different parts of the local government assurance sort of system, if you like, all have a role in identifying concerns and ensuring that they're addressed. And in this instance, the mechanism for addressing those issues was to commission the Cala review. And in parallel with that, obviously, I had my statutory reporting duty. So I think it was widely recognised that there were issues which needed to be properly investigated and put right, Councillor Dale.
I haven't got any concerns about that. I just think maybe that should be put in there, that the latter part, it became apparent there were significant weaknesses, and maybe you want to clarify that more to understand that actually the officers or various people had raised it, including external audit, whatever, and because actually that shows you the severity of it, rather than somebody just saying, got weaknesses or severe weaknesses. And I just think a little bit more addition. There's some typos, but I'll speak to you about those later.
Okay, so if I'm interpreting, you're right, Councillor Daly, it's more of a case of to break down when you say that there are concerns were raised, who raised the concerns across, to give that extra impetus to the fact that it was raised not just by one individual committee or a number, but who did it and what period of time, to show the actual scale of this problem. If I'm interpreting that right, that's obviously that would add extra texture to the document. Councillor Oliver, you think you had your hand out a little while.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point really sort of on the back of what two previous councillors have said. I think the Calendar review was only necessary because the sort of governance mechanisms had failed, had been overridden. We wouldn't have needed to commission Max Caller to do his review if they'd been robust enough and they hadn't been overridden. We all know now how they were overridden. That's in the public domain. What we need to do is make sure that can never happen again, and that the mechanisms are in place to when the flags are raised, to mean that we don't actually have to go to spend the time, and it was several years, and the expense of the Cala review. So it's really important that the work that that is now being done by the working group coming out of the Cala review is really, really robust, gets properly scrutinised by this committee and also by scrutiny committees, because I've observed firsthand what goes to scrutiny being determined by a very senior officer, and that just shouldn't happen. That is not what is in our constitution. That's not the way democratic local government should work. So we need to really sort of drill down on those recommendations, make sure that they are properly looked at and they're absolutely embedded, but also that there are mechanisms in place that if and when that does fail, there are places to go to flag it up that can't be sort of shut down.
Absolutely. Well, I personally think that is a point well made. I think the Cala report was obviously a wake-up call, I think, right across the council, wasn't it? And I think all committees as well, and our committee included, the audit committee included, need to take heed. We can't say we're okay, we're on the side of the good guys, so we're all right, because we need to start and looking at our own way of working and make sure that we are doing things as well as we possibly could. The 3 lines of defence model obviously is there and is an active thing which is being used by the council as a way of actually monitoring and operating these things. So perhaps that's something that we need as a committee to actually be more alive to. That's my opinion of this as the chair of this committee. But John, do you have any further thoughts on what Councillor Orwell's just said?
No, I think I go back to what I said earlier. It's about them asserting themselves in carrying out those roles more and insisting, that that officers are accountable, as they should be. Okay. Peter Topping, you've got a question.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to. I've got two questions. One of which is, I think we're all in sort of violent agreement with the response from Section 151 officer to Councillor Jackson, because I initially had a similar concern about where does this committee sit, but I think the response that you've given is extremely helpful. My sort of question is even if there isn't a sort of full fat responsibility assignment matrix, is there clarity in the minds of officers of the relationship and the responsibilities of the challenge board, the oversight group and the programme group that are listed on page 51, in terms of how they mesh report to each other. So that was my first question, if I may.
I think it's early days, and I think we're going to have to, you know, sort of suck it and see a bit, and because I think there is the potential for sort of overlap, duplication, and given that, you know, the challenge board, you know, is barely up and running. You know, I think we'll have to wait and see how things develop. But in terms of sort of the officer sort of side of it, the action plan is being, you know, broken down into much more granular detail, so that we're very, very clear about you know, who's responsible for doing what, and assigning timescales for doing that. I think there's also an issue about setting expectations about how quickly we're going to be able to action all of the recommendations from the Cala review. Some of those actions, I think, you know, by their very nature, are going to be are not going to be short term. Some of them can be done relatively quickly. So I think there will be a particularly important role for this committee, even after the challenge board have done their work, packed up and left. To ensure that, you know, we don't lose sight of, you know, sort of some of those longer term improvements, and perhaps that's where this committee, you know, can have its biggest impact. You know, is by making sure that we have that continuity where others might come and go, but you're always here.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Peter Topping, one follow-up.
Sorry, I had a separate point, which is a minor one, which is on page 73. There's a reference to the adult social care partnership with the NHS. And I note that there's been quite a bit of change, because Northumbria NHS Trust has handed that back. And we've now got a relationship with Harrogate and District NHS Foundation Trust, which is quite a small trust. And it's just, given the amount of change that's going on within the health service with the move to the ICS, it's just an area that I think the council should keep a close eye on, given the various changes that are going on within the NHS. So it's just a point, Chair.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think we'll take that as a point, Jan, if you want to follow up on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really well made point. But also there's a lot of other change which is happening in the adult social care space. Fair funding, you know, fair cost of care review, changes to the charging regime. You know, there's so much change going on in that space, and you know, managing a way through that without and ensuring that the services are not destabilised is going to be quite tricky, I think.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Well, unless there are any more specific questions, I think we've had a good discussion around this whole area. We are asked as a committee to approve the final annual government statement as shown in Appendix A. So can I have a proposer for that and a seconder? Councillor Towns propose, seconder Councillor Grimshaw. Thank you, and I think we'll take that as so approved as a committee. And move on to item number 8. Now, Councillor Sesford has to leave the room for this one because he has declared an interest in this, as it is the annual report of the FPS Local Pension Board for 21-22. And we have Claire, who is here to present it.
Good morning. So the annual report of the FPS, so that's Firefighters Pension Scheme Local Pension Board for 2021-22. So why has this come to you? I believe it came to the last meeting and was deferred because you weren't clear on why it had actually been brought to you. So just a little bit of background. Northumberland County Council must have a local pension board in place for the FPS. This is under the FPS governance regulations that came into effect from 2015. The local pension board is not a decision-making body. It's a type of scrutiny body. That's the nearest we can get in terms of council terminology. Its role is to assist the scheme manager. Northumberland County Council is the scheme manager under the regulations and must administer the firefighters' pension scheme. So the local pension board has its own terms of reference, which are in accordance with the governance arrangements of the regulation, according to the law and the regulations, which, among other things, require that the annual report of the board is brought to Audit Committee each year. This is a type of escalation process, so just in case the board cannot reach agreement with the scheme manager over the issues that it has concerns over, as part of the terms of reference for good governance, we built in something that allowed effectively a pressure cooker, that if the board and scheme manager couldn't work together appropriately, there would be a method of escalation, which was to bring matters that the board was unhappy about to Audit Committee and to the monitoring officer. So I'll just briefly talk you through what the board's report itself covers. The format that's been followed for the 2021-22 report is identical to the previous reports, annual reports. So on page 93, this is just housekeeping, really, an introduction, just showing that the board was quorate. It has its own quorum arrangements, which are not the same as council quorum arrangements. So on page 94, it's, again, just fairly straightforward stuff, just stating its purpose and the topics that it's covered in the year. On page 95, paragraph 4.2, this considers the administration service. Northumberland Fire and Rescue Service has received its administration service via a shared service arrangement with West Yorkshire Pension Fund, in common with half the other fire and rescue authorities in England. They use the same shared service provider.
Right, okay, thank you, Cameron. In that case, then, could, it is. I think having declared the interest, I think, could I ask you to pop outside and get a coffee for 10 minutes? Okay, sorry, Claire.
Page 97 was the next page that I wanted to bring to your attention. That just shows the accounts, so it's just a simple lift from it's an extract from the draft accounts, just so that the reader of this board report can see what's happened financially in the fire fund in 2021-22 and compare it with prior year. Page 98 shows the scheme membership. So this shows the last 5 years' worth of scheme membership. This is of great interest to those who are interested in the firefighters' pension scheme, but you know, it just looks like a column of numbers. What this tells us is that the membership has been fairly static over that year, which is pretty much what you'd expect. But the purpose of this report is to monitor what's going on with the FPS, and therefore being aware of trends, changes and so on in the membership is of vital importance to the board. Page 99, paragraph 7.3, again, this is a vital role for the board, is to consider all the breaches of the law which have happened within 2021. This may sound a bit dramatic, but the breaches of the law can be something as simple as a mistake made in somebody's pension that was put right within the same month. That nevertheless would class as a breach of the law. Breaches of the law should be reported to the board. They should be reported by the scheme manager to the board. If they are known, there will be breaches, frankly, that aren't known, but those that are known would be reported to the board. And the board must consider whether they are of material significance to the pensions regulator. So this is what this says here is that there was a breach. You would expect at least one in the year, frankly, and it was not of material. It was not something that anybody could do anything about, and it was put right as soon as it was recognised, and therefore is not of material significance to the regulator. Should not be reported. We also would expect to receive information about breaches from our shared service provider, West Yorkshire Pension Fund, and they've reported none in the year. The other thing on page 99 is the appeals, paragraph 7.4. So there's all of the appeals that go through the IDRP, which is Internal Dispute Resolution Procedure system, would be reported to the board, not so that the board can decide that the procedure came to the wrong conclusion, or for that matter to even consider the conclusion that it came to, but to consider the processes that were followed to ensure that those processes were appropriate. And last page is just a general thanks to all. So that was all I wanted to say about the board. This is ticking the boxes type exercise to bring it to audit committee. There is an escalation process, as I mentioned before. There's been nothing brought through that escalation process in the year. So I can't speak on behalf of the board, but I would say the board relationship with the scheme manager and Northumberland County Council has been good throughout that period. And all I'm asking in this report is that the report be received, so the annual report be received. That's all that's required by the terms of reference. However, as it's been brought to you, it seems pointless not asking you to comment if you have a comment that could be fed back to the board or to the scheme manager.
Okay.
Any questions?
Thank you very much, Claire. That's very clear. Admirably clear and quite a complex technical area. I'll open it up to, now we have got members of this committee who have got some experience of the boards of pensions schemes, I know from past history. So anybody got any questions on this? Now we have Claire in the room, it's a good opportunity to, no? Everybody's happy. That's good news. Everybody's happy with it, Claire. So thank you for bringing this to us and explaining it to us. It came to us at the last meeting with no covering explanation for why it was here. Nobody to talk about it, and obviously we couldn't really just put it through on the nod as an item on the agenda without having any explanation as to what was going on here. So thank you for talking us through that. So I think we'll take this one as read. Okay, and we'll try and get two members back in again who've now gone to the canteen for a cup of coffee. And should we take a minute's break and get the two members of the committee back in again, and then move on to the next item. Okay, everybody. I think we're all back together again. Claire, thank you for presenting that report. Item number 9 on our agenda is the report of the external auditor. And Cameron is back in the room, so can you talk us through this one?
I can, Chair. I'm going to keep it relatively brief. So in terms of 1920, the work that's outstanding is to complete value for money, which is underway at the moment. And Jan's helpfully provided some information to me over the last couple of weeks. It's helping us move that forward. Infrastructure is an issue for 1920 because while we issued the opinion on the accounts, we hadn't issued certificate. So I'm going to come back to infrastructure issue in a minute. It's good news, I think. In terms of 2021, the work on the accounts, you'll see from the second page of the report is fundamentally complete. We did have an issue in relation to the note that sets out how much senior officers are paid, which Jan's aware of, and that relates back to the Section 114A report and the international allowance that we've discussed previously at length, so I'm not going to go into that. From our point of view, if you recall from our audit plan, we treat the numbers in that note as material, even though they are much smaller than our materiality number for the overall accounts. And that's because we think that note in particular is of interest to the public, wider public. Not to say they wouldn't read obviously all the accounts, but there tends to be a bit of focus around how much people are paid. So we have consulted internally on that. and look very carefully at the wording of the Code of Practice that you have to use to compile the accounts, but also the accounts and audit regulations. The accounts and audit regulations specify very clearly what must be in that note, in addition to the code. And the key words are paid or payable, rather than payable. And because it says paid or payable, we think that that means that as long as there's sufficient disclosure in the accounts around about Section 114A notice, then the implications of that, and that does not lead us down the route of qualifying the accounts in relation to that issue. So we've concluded that, we've reached that conclusion. That will be reported formally when we conclude the audit, which we're hoping to do later this year, subject to infrastructure. So the other issue in relation to 2021, apart from infrastructure, is exit packages. Jan's provided us with an updated report recently on that, so we're looking at that in the context of whether or not we need anything further on that particular area of the accounts in terms of disclosure. But I think, Jan, it probably would be disclosure again for the same reasons, if that makes sense. So that takes us to infrastructure. So if you remember, we've talked about this at length, I'm not going to repeat it all. It is the carrying value of roads, culverts, bridges, drains, whatever else you've got in the accounts. It's all badged under that. An issue arose, I'm trying to remember, I think it was earlier this year, where people highlighted the fact that the records that underpin infrastructure across the country, not just for Northumberland, weren't necessarily as strong as would be necessary to make sure that proper accounting practices followed in terms of the code and the various international financial reporting standards that relate to infrastructure. At that point, there was some consultation launched around about a fix, short-term fix, until a longer-term solution was found for the issue. That has been being discussed now since probably February, if not slightly longer. We understand that that may conclude in the relatively near future because there was a meeting of the people that set the standards and that set the code, I think it was last week. Once that has been announced formally, we think then there'll be some discussions with Jan and the team around about some amendments to the accounts, some reporting on our part, and then park it until the longer term solution is found. So that would clear off, assuming that what the decision making at the end is retrospective and not prospective, then that should allow us to clear off 1920, 2021 and 21-22 when we finish the work on the 21-22 accounts, which starts this week. So I think the infrastructure thing is not specific to Northumberland, just to make that point, it is a national issue. We did have an issue in infrastructure the last couple of years, but that was resolved, the specific Northumberland issue. So it's more of a national one. Beyond that, there's nothing much else really to say. We've put a little bit of an update in terms of other things. Happy to take any questions from members.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. Well,
or anybody else if I've forgotten something.
Yeah, that's in a lot of respects quite good news and so for some of the areas that we've been focusing on quite recently at the committee, and I'm moving along in progress and things look like they're coming together. There isn't a great deal in this report, but I'll open it up to the floor if anybody wants to specifically make a point. Councillor Dale.
Yeah, just can I go back to value for money? Just at the bottom, we still haven't had the 2019-20. So you can't do the 2021.
What we're doing just now, Councillor Dale, is we're trying to wrap the whole lot together. If you think it through in your head, you've got 1920, 2021 and 21-22. Mm-hmm. We're going through the CALA reports, Section 114, and various other bits and pieces that we've gathered over the course of the last 2 years really now, and trying to pin down what years they relate to, so that if I think probably most of it relates to 1920, but not all of it. I think nearly all of it relates to 2021, but maybe not necessarily the entirety of it. And then I think there's at least one thing that's a 21-22 that's not caught by the other two. So trying to get the whole lot done at once.
Right, and will that include the group accounts?
Well, value for money doesn't really apply to Advanced Northumberland. It applies to the county council. So we look at the arrangements in relation to that. It will apply in terms of some of the issues that were raised by EY as the auditor that preceded us, plus what the CALA report said around about the governance arrangements the council had in place in relation to Advanced Northumberland. But worth remembering that those criticisms or areas for improvement identified by CALA weren't specific to Advance. It was to do with the way the council applied oversight to its subsidiary companies.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
so it will, yes.
Thank you for that.
Okay,
clarity.
thank you, Councillor. Any more questions? Yes, Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, it just follows on from that, really. I do understand that there's recently been a resolution of an employment tribunal in relation to Advanced Northumberland, and I don't know if you're fully aware of that, but it would seem to be down to the governance arrangements between the council and Advanced Northumberland and some of the issues that fell out of that. And I just wondered if that would affect your value for money view on Advanced Northumberland and the governance of it by the council and the council's group position.
Right, there's about 3 or 4 different questions in there. So, in turn, I'm not the auditor of Advanced Northumberland, but Mazar does the audit of Advanced Northumberland. That's done under a different framework to the Local Audit and Accountability Act, and the Code of Audit Practice underpins that. So that work is done by a different team out of Scotland. They will conclude on the implications for the tribunal resolution in the context of their accounts, consolidated through into the group. We will be doing what we always do with this separate team, issuing group instructions and reviewing their file to make sure we're happy with what's been done. So I was aware of the tribunal, wasn't aware it had been resolved, because obviously it's not my audit, but I'll be picking that up with Jan afterwards now, maybe not today. The second point about value for money, I need to see what the resolution from the tribunal said and what actually happened to see whether or not that would impact on the judgment around about the county council. But certainly something we would look at. But we don't give a VFM, we don't do the work on VFM in relation to Advance. It's the county council's arrangements we're interested in.
Okay.
We just audit their accounts, which is obviously a big job, but it's separate.
Okay. Does that sort of answer your question, Councillor? I think it's...
Yeah, no, we'll just pick that up at the time that those advance accounts come back here.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Okay. Thank you, Cameron. Any more questions for Cameron? One got it. No. Okay, well, that's great. Well, thank you for that update. It's as always very clear. So we'll move on.
Can I do something, Chair?
Yes.
Thank you.
Point of procedure.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a procedural point. If you just return to the report on the annual governance statement, I'm just mindful that we don't have the precise wording for Councillor Dale's proposal for more detail. So what I would propose in these sort of situations is that delegated authority is granted to the 151 officer in consultation with the chair and vice chair. That's the normal way of doing it. The precise wording, otherwise members don't have the precise wording in front of them today. If members would agree with that, Chair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right. Are we in agreement that that's a sensible way forward? I think that sounds okay. Yeah. I'm seeing nods around the room. That's fine. Thank you for that. Okay. So we now come on to urgent business. We haven't had any urgent business sent through to us for this meeting. The date and time of the next meeting, which will be Wednesday the 30th of November at 10:15, as usual, with the pre-meeting at 9:30 beforehand, as usual. We now move into part 2 of the meeting, which is the closed part of the meeting, where we ask for exclusion of press and public, and this is not to be broadcast or recorded on the YouTube